Hello, everyone. Welcome back. It's another episode of the Ramos Law Difference Makers podcast, where I, your host, Dr. Jim Hoven, get to talk to cool people every single weekend. Today is no exception. And today we're talking about one of my very favorite things, and that is animals. I love animals, and I'm sure if you're watching or listening, you probably do too. But today we're going to focus on horses, and specifically a incredibly important issue for not only our country and its legacy, but also for the lives of wild horses, of which, by the way, there's a roughly 80,000. And we're going to go more into this, but my guests today are two champions for wild horses and making sure that they stay safe and wild. I have Deb Walker and Tracy Wilson today, and they are really important people in the American Wild Horse Campaign and in Wild Horse Connection. Ladies, thank you so much for joining me, and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Hello, thanks for having us.
Absolutely. And you know, I couldn't wait to get on this podcast with you. I thank you so much for carving out time from your day. When I was talking to one of our attorneys, Ramos here, Carrie is deeply involved in horses, and was raised with them and has a heart as big as all of Nevada for these animals. And when she said that we had the opportunity to visit with you both, I jumped on that quick as I could to say, hey, let's talk about that. But as we get started, just kind of a way of introduction, could each of you take just a couple of minutes, introduce yourselves to our audience who might be listening or viewing anywhere, not only in the states where we are, Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, but around the world. Just talk a little bit about what you do and why you're so in love with wild horses.
Okay. I guess I could go first. I actually am a retired teacher, and I had been coming to Nevada in the Fish Springs area for several years and ran into some wild horses out here, and would come out and photograph them and watch them, and got so interested in their family dynamics and how they interacted with each other. And then, fast forward, when my husband retired from the military, he said, I've been dragging you around the country for 30 years. Where do you want to live? And I said, I want to live in Nevada with the wild horses. So we bought some land out here. We bought a house out here. And I sat out with the wild horses almost every day, photographed them. I would keep histories. I would watch how they would deal with their children or their babies, how they would interact with each other. And I just could not believe that people didn't know this about wild horses. And of course, we know it about elephants and dogs and everything else as well. So that's how I got interested and started. And then I heard a rumor that the BLM was going to come in and take these horses, that I literally bought a house so I could live around them. And that's how I got active in protecting them.
And were you part of this group, or how long has this group been around with respect to the American Wild Horse Campaign? Were you instrumental did you join that, or were you instrumental in founding it, or?
No, actually they were already established. And when I heard about this, I actually reached out to them and said, can you help us? And they said, yes, we can. So myself and some neighbors started up a group, 501c3, so that we could, work with the BLM and get a memorandum of understanding and start implementing this birth control that had just a phenomenal record for over 30 years. And that's exactly what we did. And after about a year, the American Wild Horse Campaign paid for everything, and they do that through donations, no tax dollars. And so we got started. We got our MOU with the BLM, and that's basically how I got started. And I remained with that group for quite some time before I actually went to work for American Wild Horse Campaign a few years ago.
Wow, that's so cool. What a great story. And how about you, Tracy? Tell us your background into horse and wild horse management.
Yeah, well, I am that little girl who never outgrew the love of horses. So, I used to dream about owning my own horse. I think I was 19 when I bought my first horse, who happened to be a Spanish Mustang, which I knew nothing about at the time. They literally handed me papers because I'm that sucker that goes in and buys the animal that needs to be rescued. And she was in that case. And I had her until she passed away. I sort of got out of horses when I had my son but he was about 4 when she passed away, and I was married, and it was just hard to deal with boarding a horse and having a family, and then we got ready to move. We'd been coming down. I have family in Reno, Nevada for my whole life, and we'd been coming down to visit. I'd seen wild horses on my visits, and when we got ready to move, I thought, well, I'm done with horses. I sold all my tack, all my gear, and I moved down here, and then I got sucked in.
What sucked you in? What was the event?
Well, I read a post. It was a local they rescued some horses off our range and they needed help. And I volunteered to scoop poop. Literally, that was my entry into volunteering with the Virginia Range Wild Horses in Nevada. And so I started with that. And then in April of 2019, I spoke to Deb Walker we were at a large animal rescue training. And she said, hey, I need you to document for our program. And I was like, I can take pictures, I can do this. And so I got involved that way, and I fell in love with the data side of this, with tracking the ability. We have the ability to track every horse on the range by photographs, by their markings and colorings. And I got a little nerdy about it and kind of fell in love with the whole data side. And Deb and another coworker who's recently retired sort of just brought me along and kept pumping me up that I should come work for the organization. And pretty soon I was asked to work. And so I became a contractor part-time. And then as of March of this year, I'm now a full-time employee, and I'm the special projects manager. So I do a lot of different things, but I also still volunteer with our technical large animal rescue team. We do a lot of calls because of the wild horses and their proximity to people. And I volunteer with our range management team, which is Wild Horse Connection. So, we all work together really well. We have a bunch of organizations that really work strongly together for the protection of these horses. And it's been a lot of fun to be able to actually become employed in my passion.
Oh, we should all be so lucky. I know I feel that way, that I get to work with people that need help every day and with team members that are growing. And so I know what you're feeling, but to feel it for those big, huge animals. My daughter was really, really into horses at a thing called the Westerneers here in Colorado, and they're a riding group, right? They're precision riders, and they jump and do tricks and all that kind of stuff. So I was around horses just enough where I am amazed by them. They're magical. Their eyes are so big, and their noses, and we have huge dogs at our house, and I always have to put my face by their face and my nose by their nose. And so at a horse, it's like a bigger dog. They just seem so friendly and so wonderful. And the horses we're talking about right now, they're wild. And as I mentioned in this, I don't know if my number was exactly right, but I think I read on the website that there's about 80,000 of these wild horses in kind of a 10-state region in the West. Is that right?
I think that's what the BLM has recorded. And they're the ones that do the flyover census. So we tend to use their data in that sense. Yeah.
And so with these horses, I know they're on millions and millions of acres. We've mentioned a couple things. Range management we talked about, right, Tracy? We talked about large animal rescue, and then wild horses and keeping them wild. So I think there's probably a misconception that you guys could help with, because for me, I thought it was a great thing when wild horses were going to be rounded up and then given new homes. And I think that's because we think that we need a home and we need this structure and we need this shelter. But after going through the information that you guys had, it's like maybe the best place for these beautiful animals is right where they're at on these wild ranges. So is the purpose of the American Wild Horse Campaign to keep all wild horses wild, or is it to manage herd size and take some of them? Or give me kind of the wild horse story.
Our goal is humane management, to manage their numbers on the range where they are. Even on our local range, when I talk about rescue, that's only horses that they have to be removed for an injury or something. We try always to keep wild horses wild. So, there are some really interesting behavior aspects that go into wild horses. They live in family bands. They're loyal to their families. They're We had a mare recently that just lost a baby, and she stood over that baby and grieved for 2 solid days. So people that think that these animals don't have emotions have not been on the ground to see this. And so we want to keep them in their family bands on the range, wild, living the way that they have been born and lived for decades, right? We want them to stay out there. So our goal is to show that we can do humane management of the numbers on the range without having to remove them, which comes at great cost to the taxpayer if we have to remove them. It's not just the cost of the removals, which cost millions of dollars, but then to sustain those horses for the rest of their life in holding.
Yes.
Because we don't have enough people to adopt the numbers that they're taking off. It's just not possible.
And why are they doing this? Because here's what I was fascinated by. As I was looking through and preparing, I saw that Congress did an act. They passed a law in I think it was 71, and it's called the Wild Free Roaming Horses and Burros Act. And so I know we're talking about horses, but it's horses and burros that are in this category. And the protection status that they got for these beautiful animals, there's only one other animal that has it, and that's the bald eagle. So to me, it's pretty clear, like, if they're supposed to be wild, then why are we not letting them be wild? Is it a population overgrowth issue? Is it like why? How are people getting around this congressional law?
Deb.
Well, whenever big money is involved, there's all kinds of propaganda that is thrown out there: overpopulation, habitat degradation, scaring off wildlife, not sharing water holes with cattle, just all sorts of things that have been years and years and years of indoctrination to the American public. And just like you had mentioned about the adoption, some horses do get adopted to good homes, but we're finding now, you may have read on the site, that many of the adoption incentive horses are going to slaughter once the people get their titles, and they're being sold. And there's just a little thing saying, I will not sell to slaughter. Well, if you take the horse to auction, you're not selling it to slaughter, but we know that's how they go. So,
but why would a horse go to slaughter? What do they do with horses that they take to slaughter? It's not like a cow where you're going to get steak from it or something. What's the purpose there?
The European market eats horse.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. I had no idea.
The horses are sent out of the country, either by airplane, or, they're packed into crates and put into, airplane bellies, or they're shipped to Canada, or they're shipped to Mexico, because it's not legal to slaughter them here. There's no humane way to slaughter a long-necked animal. So just slaughtering them is a horrific thought, but knowing that they're suffering, it just takes it to a different level. So this is, and to take our protected Mustangs and have this happen is it's made things made of nightmares, So, the AWHC is tracking that, and they're holding, the BLM's feet to the fire, and the burros, same thing. Tracy, how many are they rounding up right now? Burros?
Oh, I mean, they're taking something like 19,000 horses and burros this year in 2022.
Right.
19,000.
That's the goal.
So they're trying to basically, if the numbers are right, they're trying to take 25% of the entire wild horse and burro population, right? If you're taking,
there's a lot of talk that the horses are overpopulated, overgrazing, but these same lands are shared by livestock grazing permittees. They have a permit to graze their livestock on these public lands for prices that date back to the 80s without a price increase. And the reality is that horses only exist on 17% of our public lands. They like to do a lot of talk about, they're ruining all our public lands, but it's like, actually, the horses are only on 17% of our public lands. And the amount of cattle, while extremely large, only makes up a tiny percent of the actual beef market in our country. So if we removed all the cattle from our public lands, you would barely notice a bump in the beef market. Our beef is raised in the Midwest where it belongs, not on arid desert lands in the West. That's not good grazing for cattle. I mean, they're back on lush pastures in the Midwest, and that's where it should be happening, not out here, or not out here where it's arid desert land, you know. And so we get a lot of competition. There's also competition from mining rights and public recreation and different things. But there are ways that, you know, public recreation, use of public lands can be managed alongside wildlife. The other problem that we see is that because there are livestock there, the livestock owners obviously don't want natural predators taking their livestock because that costs them money. So wildlife department comes in and kills the predators. So now then they complain that the horses don't have any natural predators. Well, they do, but they've removed or killed them all.
But that so is the horses is the reason for them wanting horses natural predators to have horses with natural predators to keep the herd sizes down, and that's why then you guys come around with the natural kind of fertilization control?
Well, I mean, natural predators, that's natural life. All animals out there have a balance when left alone between predation and prey that helps manage their own numbers if humans weren't involved. But of course, we are involved. We are involved in multiple ways. So, but removing predators and then saying that there's too much growth and they don't have any natural predators is a bit of a misconception. They do have them. They've just been removed.
And I guess my thought would be, if I'm in your shoes and asking questions, I'm like, okay, well, let's talk about the number of predator initiated herd management number. What does that look like? Is that 1,000 animals a year, or is it 150? And how do you then manage that with what you guys are doing with, I know you guys will go into this later, but the darters that are part of that process? Like, it just seems to me like, you know, number one, and I don't know, but is a horse really going to be unable to live alongside a cow? It seems like that's not a big deal. They're not going to, you know, they're not going to predate on the cows.
Right, right.
And they're also, it seems to me that humans are safe against wild horses as long as you're not a knucklehead and try to run amongst them and, you know, go do all that kind of thing, right?
Yeah. And I can speak to that. I live out here with wild horses, and I ride a mare, and my good friend rides a mare, and we have ridden all over this range, and we have never had issue one. I know some people say that they will, or they have, and I just haven't seen it in all the years that I've lived out here. And we actually have photos of the horses being afraid of the cows when the cows are at ponds, or the sheep, or, you know, any other wildlife. They're kind of, you know, they're chickens. They're prey animals. So they're like, oh my God, what is that? So
Yeah.
I did want to just circle back at something really quick. When Tracy touched on the grazing and the prices, the taxpayers also subsidize that. So the difference between what they're paying and what they should be paying, you and I and Tracy are helping to pay that.
Interesting. And
So
we're going to get hit either way. We're going to get hit to make up the grazing prices. We're going to get hit to remove the horses that by law are not supposed to be removed, and we're going to get hit to house those horses if we can find humane conditions for the rest of the horse life. And am I right in saying that horses can live like to be 30 or something?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a lot of, there's a lot of items in there. I'm still a little bit hung up on when you have a protection status, is it purely money of big lobbyists that can get around the fact that there's a congressional law, or how did we get here?
Well, I do know, and I don't know this law as well as I should, so shame on me, but the Burns Act kind of went in and did what happens to some good legislation and put in some pretty hefty loopholes. And so those are used now with the protection, like, oh, they're starving, and yet they're rounding up horses that have body scores of 4s and 5s. And, oh, they're, you know, there's no water. Well, they're sharing water, and there is water if they just leave them alone and let them, so they use all these things to say, this is why we have to round them up for their own good. And then they do also do it because of round them up because of habitat degradation, which I have to tell you is just a bunch of baloney. When I went out to Utah for the Anarchy roundup prior to that, I drove through what seriously looked like moonscape. I mean, it was so, really, I'd never seen anything like it, and it had been sheep grazed. And when I went over the hill to where the horses were, it was like a utopia. It was beautiful. They hadn't hammered it. The water source was perfect. They weren't, pooping in it, or, it was just, they go and drink and they go off. They can go up to 30, 40 miles a day. So they don't, they pretty much roam around. They don't just plop down and graze down to nothing. And as soon as those horses were gone, in came the livestock.
Wow.
Yeah, wow is right.
What we're talking about right now is the hard part of this, where we see that there's a problem, right? There's an issue for some people, like for people like you and me now as a new, I'm open to these concepts. I'm kind of like, I don't understand. And you guys are like, this is insanity. And I'm sure there's other people that like, oh yeah, there's not enough this, that, or the other, so we got to do it. But as we start learning about these things, we need to be in good communication with the powers that be so that we can fight and we can work when necessary and do the right thing for the horses and for our history. I know that they were talking about the fact that, in fact, I wrote this down, that having these horses protected is because they are living symbols of the historic and pioneer spirit of the West. And that's just so cool, right? We don't want to forget our heritage and where we come from. So to have that be the description in the law that Congress passed back in '71, I think we need to keep that in mind. And so as we're going through what you guys do, if I remember right, there's kind of 4 different things that your organizations do. And one is you try to find legislation, right? Like you try to do something with updating laws or something to that effect. And then the second one is you litigate, like you'll sue people, states, counties, whoever it might be, and you can explain this better, on getting that done. Is 3, you advocate, if I remember correctly, on behalf of the horses and the people that love them. And then the 4th thing is where you do this herd control through humane, natural methods. Can you guys kind of speak to that 4-pronged mission of what you're doing to protect these beautiful animals?
Sure. I mean, we have a legislative team that they are constantly talking to legislators, educating legislators. As you can imagine, there's a lot of people sitting in an office in Washington, D.C. that don't live out here, that don't really have any idea what's happening. So a lot of it is really opening their eyes to the situation, bringing in some facts that maybe they haven't been given, showing them how it can be done with our pilot program here on the Virginia Range. Our team is working, they're educating legislators and policymakers all the time. Litigation, yes, that happens too. And then also working on getting laws passed. As Deb mentioned earlier about slaughter, the way we keep slaughter from happening in this country right now is that there is no USDA funded oversight of slaughter for horses. And so every year through appropriations, that has to be re-included in the language so that we make sure for another year no slaughter plants can open in this country. We would all like to see the SAFE Act passed, which would then make it a law that we're not slaughtering horses in this country. And also they've just tried to strengthen that to also prevent us from shipping horses across the border to be slaughtered just because we can't slaughter them here. So that law would make a huge difference. And so that's all a lot of the work. And then, like you said, the educating the public, huge public education, trying to get it out there when there's important things the public needs to know about so that they can reach out to their lawmakers in their state, in their, district, whatever that may be. And so that they can also participate in this to help. I mean, anybody can request a meeting with their legislators. Doesn't mean it'll be granted, but they can request it. Oftentimes they'll get a meeting with staff. You can pick up the phone and talk to the staff of your legislators. During business hours, they have people there. That is their job, to answer those calls. So we really work with people to make those calls, because unless our voices are heard, nothing's going to change.
Amen. That is so true. And that's true in anything, right? Like if you have a thought or an opinion, you need to share it so you can get conversation going and make positive change. And as you guys are going through that process, how is it that you use advocacy and education, especially if someone's not living in the states that we're talking about? I think the 10 states, and I don't know them off the top of my head, but the one I'm in, Colorado, where you guys are, Nevada, I think Arizona, California, everything in that area, Utah, probably Idaho, all of that part of the country. If someone lives in Ohio, I would imagine that somewhere there might be some wild horses in Ohio. I don't know, but how do you make a connection? How do you make a connection with someone that doesn't get to see these animals like this, and have them find an interest in their heart to support this effort?
We live in the world of digital social media. And so that is a huge outreach. We have a huge following on social media. We try to reach all avenues of social media. We have an incredible videographer who does amazing documentaries surrounding our work, surrounding the horses. We try to really get people to understand individual horses, their bands, their families, how they function on the range, so that they can make that connection that you're talking about. Like, they're way back there in Ohio or somewhere. Do they care about this horse out here? But let me show you how this horse lives. Let me show you where he lives. Let me show you how he interacts with his mares and with his babies. And that then makes a connection. Somebody's like, wow, that's incredible. I don't want to see this animal get harmed. That's where we really strive to make that connection for people who aren't lucky enough to live right here where they roam.
Oh, so good.
And in addition to that, when the horses get in trouble, that same social media avenue is a way to say, all right, we need you to call your legislators right now. This is what we need you to ask of them.
Right.
And AWHC has a great Facebook page and Instagram and everything. However, the communities all have pages as well. Virginia Range has Stay Wild. Out here in Fish Springs, we have the Pinette Wild Horse Advocate Group, and then we have Fish Springs Alliance that shows the families. And it's like watching a newsreel every day, like, oh, Zorro lost his band, and people are just captivated by it all over the world. We're talking.
We have people come from all over the world to visit these horses.
Yes.
Wow.
Australia. I had a veterinary team from the UK come visit. They had one of our stallions had to be put down, and they wanted to come and look at his skeleton. And just so that's a great way to reach people worldwide.
It's interesting that you say that. I did an episode of the show that you guys might want to go check out with an artist, a photographer. Her name is Guadalupe, and we call her Guad. And she did a whole book, which I have at my house, a coffee table book that's, oversized, beautiful book on the Icelandic wild horses.
Oh,
and
fantastic.
Absolutely gorgeous book. And so she goes into some of that. And, we've talked so far in the first part of the show about the problem and some of the initiatives. I'd like to now transition to help people get a connection to these animals. Can you guys describe the family unit, what it's like to watch them run, and some of the things they do? Because to me, that just the thought of a group of horses traipsing across a field, and I've seen it just a couple of times here in Colorado when I've been fishing, seen this kind of thing happen, and it raises my energy, right? It fills my soul. So I'd love for you, if you can explain to us a little bit about wild horse life.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm going to tell the recent history or the recent rescue on our range, but Tracy's got a million stories because she has done, like a full release or something. It's just unbelievable. So we had a mare that somehow got her foot stuck into a dog toy, one of those big tires. And we were hoping it would come off, never did. So the group set up a catch pin. We finally got her in there. the BLM graciously came and got her. And her 4 band sisters, is what we'll call them, would not leave her side. So they had to take those horses along with the mare with the toy on her foot in order to get them to the facility to take it off.
Wow.
And so then, because they have panels in between, so they had her in this panel and the horses just kind of waited. And so on the range was her stallion, Carson, her mom, Scarlett, and her band sister, Sydney. And she was, and by the way, they don't like it when we name them. So we'll talk about that a little later, right, Tracy? But anyway, so about an hour later, and they stayed right where they had put her in the trailer. The minute that truck and trailer came over the hill, that stallion started calling to his mare in that truck and the other girls. And they came up and they stood and waited for that gate to come open.
Wow.
Yeah.
So they recognized the truck, they recognized the trailer.
Oh, yeah. They're smart.
Oh my goodness.
Like when I go out to the range, I have a hitch on the back of my car, and it's always the truck that I've used on the range. Every time they can hear that come out there, and they go, "Oh, that's just Deb. She's just here to take pictures."
Oh, that's funny.
They know, and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, hi." But they do, and I could not believe, and I was so glad that the BLM Wild Horse and Burro specialists witnessed that, because generally speaking, they try to, for a lack of a better word, dehumanize them, or what am I trying to say, Tracy?
Yeah, no, I get it. Yeah, they're just an animal.
Yeah.
They're not
Right.
they're not a social network. They're a creature out just roaming around.
Yeah. So that's a very recent story that happened that I thought was just sweet.
So beautiful. What about you, Tracy? Tell us some stuff about horse life and what these animals are like. Get our hearts open to these beautiful creatures.
Let me start with the band structure. So a lot of people don't really know what to call it. Is it a herd? What is it? So a herd is any large number of the animals in a certain area, but the bands are where the families are. So there's a band of horses, and that's a family, and that usually has a band stallion, and then he sometimes will have a lieutenant stallion, not always, and then it usually consists of his mares and his young. Usually when the boys hit about 2 years old, the band stallion's going to tell them goodbye. He's going to kick them out. They've reached sexual maturity. He doesn't want a challenge for him trying to take some of those mares, so they will kick them out. And those boys that get kicked out form what we call bachelor bands. They are absolutely my most favorite on the range.
Yeah.
They are so entertaining. I could sit and watch them for hours, because these boys then it's just, think of a bunch of adolescent boys running around trying to figure out their way in the world. And they're trying to be macho, and they spar and teach each other to fight. And people will freak out, and they'll be like, "Oh my God, they're trying to kill each other." And they'll spar for a while, and then they just stop and they walk away together and start grazing. Like, it's not, it's just, and they're so comical. They lay their legs over each other, and they play, and they roughhouse, but it's all part of the learning process. It's how they learn. It's how they grow and get strong to be a stallion, who then one day starts challenging another stallion to acquire his own mares. And so, the structure of the families understanding that is just huge. And their bonds are strong. Like I told you about the one that grieved her baby. But last year we had a band had gotten into a fenced property, and then something spooked them and they ran out, but the baby got separated. And we had a team out there in the dark trying. And these horses are fighters. They are survivors. And this little baby had all the instinct to survive in the world, and they just could not get her. So what they ultimately did, they worked with the landowner, shut the gate for the night. The next morning we went back and we set up a chute, and we were finally able to get this baby into the trailer. We had other volunteers out looking for the family band. They found them on another property. They held them there. We came up with the trailer, and same as Deb's thing, that mama heard that baby inside the trailer as it was backing down the driveway, and her head shot up and she started calling. We opened the gate, and the baby's standing there looking out, and wild horses don't willingly step on a trailer. This mama walked up to the back of the trailer and put her 2 front legs in and got almost all the way in just to retrieve her baby. And they turned around and went out. And of course the baby immediately started nursing, and and all the aunties were around. And I mean, their bonds are incredibly strong.
How big are the family bands? Is there typically like 6 or 15?
I would say on average, they're in that 6 to 8 size, but we have them as small as 2 or 3 and as large as 14, 16.
Wow.
It just depends. The large ones are tough. Those stallions have to work hard to keep that many horses together.
I imagine.
It's a lot.
And do the bands merge to form herds? So herds has several bands within it?
They do, yeah. And you'll see it when there's times of predators in the area. You'll see all those bands come together in a big herd because there's safety in numbers. So we do see that quite a bit, actually. And in the wintertime, when the mares aren't in estrus, so they're not worried about breeding so much, they tend to hang around a little more. In the spring, when the mares start, cycling and they want to be breeding or whatever, then they'll tend to spread out a little bit more. But yeah, they will definitely come together in big herds.
And is there a time, because you talked about horse rescue, is there a time sometimes to take these horses that are wild and move them into captivity for their best interests if you have to rescue them and that kind of thing?
Sure. So if we have a horse that is injured, typically we'll monitor that horse on the range, try to keep it wild. If it becomes a situation where they need veterinary interference, if it's something that can be a quick vet treatment where we can pull them, get them the treatment they need, get them back out very quickly. The NDA works with, that's the Nevada Department of Agriculture who oversees our horses. They'll work with us to allow that to happen. And then there's times where it's like, this horse needs to come off. It's going to be a couple months for it to recover. During that time, it's going to become dependent on humans. So at that point, the best choice for that horse is then to put it into an adoption situation, get it a good home, let it lead a domestic life, get some training, that type of thing. And our range management team she works with a trainer. They try to make sure any horse they adopt out has the basics. They can be haltered, have their feet trimmed, get vet care. And then from there, somebody can take that horse on for training for saddle use or whatever, they want to do. But for them, we try to keep them as wild as we can.
Is there a different life cycle in the horses if they remain wild versus not? Like I know wolf packs, the average wolf pack, if I remember right, the wolves will grow maybe 7-8 years old and then their life is done, as opposed to a domesticated dog. They live longer. Is there anything that has been shown or what you guys have seen where a horse left to be on the range, they have a life cycle that's different than, especially if it's been converted? Because I would imagine some of them, if they don't get with another band, and I don't know if they can switch bands after, if they get separated, do they get a new band, and does that change their life expectancy?
I don't think changing bands changes the life expectancy. And while I think a lot of people would say, oh, they don't live as long in the wild, it's a harder life. In the last 2 years, we've had some older horses die and we've had the vet check their teeth. And these horses have been aged at 30 years, living wild on the range. So, it's pretty impressive. They're tough.
They are.
Injuries.
They are.
Without our intervention that would put a domestic horse owner in the hospital themselves having to deal with, it's just like,
We've seen some horrendous
it's amazing
injuries.
what they can overcome. Yeah.
And do they ever is part of the management cycle or system, if they're saying that there's too many horses in one area, can they take them and transplant them? Like I know they do, if a bear doesn't do X, Y, and Z, then they take the bear and they try to move it farther away so it doesn't come in contact with humans. Now, if it does A, B, C, then that bear is going to be euthanized. Is there any kind of program where the horses are relocated as opposed to rounded up for one of these other things?
Yeah. I mean, again, we try not to do it any more than we have to, but on our particular range, now this is not probably true for the BLM, but on our particular range in the Virginia range, which is almost 300,000 acres, so it's a good sized range. If we have some horses that and we've had this happen in the past where they've gotten into a neighborhood, they've gotten very habituated to well-meaning, but not well-meaning people that hand feed them or do something they shouldn't. And that then creates a situation where that horse is going to keep coming back because they're like, oh, free food. So that becomes then problematic. Then obviously not all the neighbors are going to appreciate that and start complaining. So we'll set up a trap, load those horses up and put them on a different part of the range that's more remote, that keeps them away from the people, gets them back to their natural life and let them be without the human interference.
And as far as the roundups go, once those horses are taken, that's pretty much it. However, there has been talk with AWHC in, that part of their plan as far as their goals, what they would like to see happen is for the HMAs that have been zeroed out for horses to go back there. And that's one thing that they have talked about.
Can you explain that? What's an HMA and zeroed out?
Sorry about that. HMA horse management area. Those are the designated areas by that law where the horses are allowed to live. And so when they take all the horses away, they've zeroed it out. So, AWHC has talked about, well, wouldn't it be great if they could just take horses and repopulate it, and yes. Of course, the horses are gelded and so forth. But so that's been talked about, but it has not happened.
Okay. And so now I guess the direction that you guys see this, I know, Tracy, we were talking offline and before the show started, you're kind of involved in a horse roundup of something that's going, like you're keeping an eye on it or something of that sort, right?
I think what Deb was referring to is there is a current roundup happening. I'm not there. We do have people on the ground there, but there's a current roundup happening. I believe it was Twin Peaks. Is that right, Deb?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. The first 2 days of the roundup were horrific. There was pens set up for the trap that were too small for the volume of horses that they were bringing in. They ran 100 horses easily into a pen that probably should have held no more than 30 or 40. Oh. Horses were literally climbing over the top of each other. It was a bad scene, and they literally the pen started to break apart. The panel started to come apart, and there were men on the ground holding the panels with their hands while 1,000-pound animals are climbing over the top of each other trying to get out through these openings. And I'm pretty sure what Deb's referring to is my horror in that is somebody could have died. Never mind the yes. horses that died, and horses did die in that. One horse was severely injured in her face and had to be euthanized. Another stallion broke a leg and had to be euthanized. But a human could have died. And any other government contract would have been shut down by OSHA. I don't know why this is allowed for this. Any other government contractor would have to have that kind of oversight to make sure employees are safe and have safety equipment. There was nobody there with a helmet on their head. I'm part of the rescue team. We trap horses. We all wear safety helmets because one knock to the head and you're a goner. It's astounding to me that kind of safety lapse can happen on a government contract and put people's lives in danger.
Yeah, and it might be safe to say that it's one of those that unless anybody's there to say anything, the word never gets back to the contractor, right? Like it's interesting how, and you mentioned it, Deb, earlier, how money can play such a huge role in the light that gets shined on something or the lack of light that does not get shown on something based on funds. We've seen it here at the law firm where government contracts have caused people to do some really bad things on certain products to protect that are meant to protect certain populations are actually hurting them, and because someone took a shortcut for money. And so when we see things like what you're talking about, yeah, it's if whatever should happen, in my opinion, it should be really done the right way so that everything that can be possibly done to protect the animals and the people involved is being done. But what I hear you say is that might not always be the case.
Right. And I will say that AWHC filed an animal welfare procedure complaint, and the next day they were bringing them in much smaller numbers. What most people don't realize is these contracts for the roundup contractors, they pay by the horse.
Oh.
Dead or alive. Dead or alive.
They are driven by numbers.
Mm-hmm. And so they don't tell them, hey, in order to make sure that this population's healthy, we need to take 17. They just say, go get as many as you can?
Well, I believe that they were probably told after that happened that they had to bring them in smaller numbers because it did start happening, but it never should have happened in the first place.
Agreed.
But that is a situation that occurred because he could, not because he should.
Yes.
Well, and let me say this too, like our senator here in Nevada has been taken to a roundup, and I'm quite certain it was a soft roundup. And if our senators and House of Representatives could see the reality of it, they would never allow this to happen. But they're shielded from it, and they're told a completely different story. Oh, they're going to starve. This is why we have to do this. And we are up against a giant. We really and truly are.
Well, I'll tell you, the advantage I think you guys have, you've already talked about, Tracy, with the social media and videographers. I noticed even on your website there's some videos of some really just, it's not for someone with a heart for animals, it's hard to watch, right? Some of that stuff. And so I think getting that into some of these lawmakers' hands might be good. And so that would be one thing that you're probably already doing. But another thing that hit my mind as you guys were talking, there's been, what would you call them? There were campaigns to raise awareness and money for whatever. It could be a child in another country, or it could be a certain animal, where you adopt an animal. You say, hey, and you mentioned it like, keeping the bands together. Is there a campaign that could be done that would assure, like, if I send $100, that goes towards keeping this band together. You can be sure that, and I now am tied emotionally to my band. Like what you said, it's the Mustang with his harem and their children. That's my group, and I don't know if that's something that could be done for fundraising as well.
Yeah, it is interesting. It's a little bit hard when you can't guarantee that you won't get rounded up.
Yep.
It's
Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Hey, listen, that's a horse. That's a roundup dog. That dog just, what do you call them?
well here.
You talked about numbers. One of the things that that happens is the BLM has their, how many horses they'll allow on this HMA. And so they'll go in and they'll pull off, and they either go low AML or high AML, or, to pull those horses off. They're supposed to leave them in a situation where their genetics are viable. I don't know that always happens. But that's the way that they do the numbers. And I will tell you, back to your other question, is we at one time had in Fish Springs here had some horses taken away, and there was enough money raised through social media to keep those families together. One family had 3 or 4 generations, right, Tracy?
Wow.
And so we all were given horses to bid on. They wouldn't give them to us. They wouldn't let us, buy them. We had to bid on them against other people online. And we ended up getting every single horse. And all those horses are now living together in sanctuary because people donated money to keep those horses together.
Wow. See that, and that's a really incredible effort of combining the heart for the animals with the tools available and resources for a specific group. I think that's amazing. And I mean, the work you guys are doing is so important. I can't thank you enough. As we kind of come to the end of the show, is there anything that you would want people to know that we already haven't talked about, as far as something about the horses or the burros, or something that they could do to help make a difference or to get connected with your project?
Well, I don't want to get off the show without talking about the world's largest wild horse fertility control project. It was just done right here in Nevada. Before I retired, I was the project coordinator, and Tracy's basically running that now, and I'm helping her as a retired person. But this program, we have delivered almost 6,000 treatments. We've treated almost 1,800 mares, right, Tracy?
A little over 1,700, yeah.
Yes. And we have reduced the population, or not the population, but the amount of foals that hit the ground by 60%. And this program, I want to talk about difference makers here. This program is run by volunteers. on the ground in 103-degree temperature or 10-degree temperature in the snow out there with their scientific database, and they are giving mares birth control. It's reversible. It's made from pig proteins. And I'm just speeding through this very quickly. We can treat a mare for $70 in her first year and $700 over her lifetime. If she's picked up in a roundup, it's $1,000 just for her, according to BLM, and I think it might be more now. And then for that horse, $50,000 for her lifetime to be in holding.
Wow.
You look at our program that's run by donations, not and grants, not by taxpayer dollars, and administered by volunteers who get out there and document and spot and implement this fertility control. It is really a model. And what we did is we asked the Nevada Department of Agriculture, don't round up to AML. Let us work with a population that you think is overpopulated. We don't ever think that. And show how we can work this program for 3 to 5 years. And we're doing it. And it's being successful. And it's being looked at worldwide. Mm-hmm. So people can always contribute to the Virginia Range Fertility Control Program through American Wild Horse Campaign, but I can't speak highly enough of the people who are retired in their 60s and 70s out there humping the hills, looking for horses and treating these mares.
Oh, man, you guys, that's so beautiful. And so people may want to get involved, whether they want to get trained as one of these folks to help with fertility control, or donate money, or just be an activist voice. How can they do that with your group?
They can go to the AmericanWildHorseCampaign.org website, and there's going to be more opportunities as we expand. The BLM now has $11 million in their budget for fertility control. So as we expand and start putting in some proposals to do fertility control on other ranges, there will be help needed. So, they should go to the website, submit volunteer applications for sure.
Oh, that's beautiful.
We would love to get veterans involved in our darting program.
Absolutely.
Oh, so good. Well, you guys, you've been a treat. You've made my heart full by sharing the beautiful lives of these horses with us. Whether you're watching this or listening to it, I hope it tugged on your heartstrings like it did mine. Please share this with someone. And if you can, get involved. If you have a heart for horses, talk to these guys, reach out, see what you can do to be part of the solution to keep these wild horses wild. And obviously you have a friend with us in Ramos Law. We wish you guys much continued success, and thank you for guarding this most blessed treasure that we have.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having us.
Yes, thank you very much.
Ladies, have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Bye.